The grand auditorium of Westfield Medical University hummed with anticipation as Dr. Grass Smith approached the podium. At 40, he cut an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading his dark hair, adding gravity to his handsome features. As the university's owner and chairman, his annual address marked the official commencement of the academic year. Excellence is not an aspiration at Westfield, he began, his deep voice resonating through the sound system. It is our baseline, our foundation. Gra had delivered variations of this speech for 8 consecutive years. The words came automatically while his mind drifted to the board meeting scheduled afterward, budget allocations, expansion plans, the new cardiology wing that would bear his name. His eyes swept across the sea of eager faces mechanically. That midway through a sentence about the responsibility of healing, his gaze locked with hers. Third row, aisle seat. The young woman hadn't been looking at him initially. She'd been scribbling notes with intense focus, but as if sensing his attention, she glanced up, and Gra forgot the remainder of his sentence. Her eyes were extraordinary, intelligent, penetrating, unimpressed. While everyone else regarded him with deference, her expression held something closer to assessment. Dark skin with warm undertones, high cheekbones, and a defined jawline framed features that struck him as both classically beautiful and distinctly memorable. For 3 heartbeats, Grass stood silent, an unprecedented lapse that sent his assistant shifting nervously at the side of the stage. Hands, he finally continued, covering his momentary disorientation with a deliberate pause. Into your hands we place not just knowledge but trust, society's trust. Remember this with every patient you encounter. He finished the address without further incident, but his awareness remained fixated on the woman in the third row. Not once did she appear impressed or intimidated by him, a novelty that burrowed under his skin. After the closing applause, Grad declined his usual meet and greet with faculty, claiming urgent business. Instead, he retreated to his private office and summoned his assistant. The student in the third row, aisle seat, he said without preamble. Dark blue blazer. Find out who she is. If his assistant found the request unusual, he showed no indication. Right away, Dr. Smith. Alone again, Grass stood at the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the campus. He transformed from a middling medical school to one of the nation's elite institutions. His grandfather had purchased the struggling university as a tax write-off 30 years ago. But where others in his family saw a business asset, Grass recognized potential. Now, at the pinnacle of professional success, he found himself unsettled by a momentary connection with a student whose name he didn't even know. 3 hours later, a file appeared on his desk. Maeve Saylor, his assistant announced. First-year medical student, age 24. Graduated summa cum laude from Howard University with dual degrees in biochemistry and psychology. Partial scholarship recipient. Currently works night shifts at Memorial Hospital to cover remaining tuition. Grat opened the file. Her photograph, formal, unsmiling, yet somehow radiating determination, triggered the same unexpected reaction he'd experienced during the address. Interesting choice of specialty interest, he murmured, scanning further. Neurogenetic disorders and cognitive rehabilitation. Not the usual path to wealth or prestige. She included a personal statement about her grandmother's early-onset dementia and the lack of treatment options in underserved communities. His assistant noted, the admissions committee mentioned it as particularly compelling. After his assistant departed, Grass spent an uncharacteristic hour reviewing Maeve's complete application. Her writing revealed a sharp, analytical mind tempered by compassion. One professor had written, Miss Saylor challenges conventional wisdom not from arrogance, but from a genuine belief that medicine must evolve beyond its comfortable paradigms. That night, in his penthouse overlooking the city, Grass found himself restless. He poured a glass of 30-year-old scotch and stepped onto the terrace. In 2 decades, he transformed from a surgeon with gifted hands to a man who wielded power through proxies, money, influence, institutional authority. Yet, as midnight approached, his thoughts repeatedly returned to Maeve Saylor, and the brief moment their eyes had connected. There had been something rare in that exchange, a genuine seeing beyond status or position. When had anyone last looked at him as simply a man rather than as Dr. Grass Smith, the institution? He dreamed of her that night, not the explicit fantasies that might be expected of a man his age, but something more disorienting. Walking alongside her through the medical campus, engaged in conversation as equals, her laughter sudden and genuine at something he'd said, he woke at dawn with her name on his lips. This unusual preoccupation demanded action. Gray had built his empire by identifying what he wanted and creating paths to acquire it. This situation would be approached with the same strategic precision. By afternoon, he had rearranged his typically inviolable schedule to include a surprise visit to the first-year anatomy lab. His arrival caused a ripple of nervous energy among students and instructors alike, all except Maeve Saylor, who remained focused on her dissection, her movements deliberate and precise. Dr. Smith, the laboratory instructor, stammered. We weren't expecting. Just observing, Grab replied smoothly, moving through the room with practiced authority. Please continue. He positioned himself near Maeve's station, observing her technique from a professional distance that nonetheless allowed him to notice details, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows, the economical grace of her hands. When the instructor called time, Maeve finally acknowledged his presence, meeting his gaze directly. Dr. Smith, she said, neither flustered nor overly deferential. Is there something specific you're evaluating in our technique? The question, direct, professional, yet subtly challenging, caught him off guard. Students didn't typically address him without being spoken to first. Miss Saylor, he replied, her name revealing his foreknowledge. A flicker of surprise crossed her features before she controlled it. I'm always interested in observing our most promising students. Your approach to the brachial plexus dissection was unconventional but effective. Traditional approaches often sacrifice visualization of the proximal attachments. She responded, removing her gloves with methodical precision. I find starting medially provides better overall preservation. Her voice carried a musical quality despite its professional tone. Gray found himself wanting to prolong the interaction. Your application mentioned an interest in neurogenetic disorders, an ambitious focus for a first year. Something guarded entered her expression. You've reviewed my application personally. I take particular interest in scholarship recipients. The lie came easily. Your background is impressive. Thank you, she said, her tone indicating the conversation was concluded as she gathered her materials. If you'll excuse me, Dr. Smith, I have a shift at Memorial beginning in 30 minutes. She walked away without waiting for his dismissal, a small but distinct breach of the deference typically shown to him. Rather than irritation, Gray felt a surge of fascination. That night, for the second time in his life, Gray Smith dreamed of the same woman twice. This time they stood in his private research laboratory, her fingers brushing his as she passed him a specimen slide, the contact sending electricity through his body. He woke at 3 in the morning, his heart racing. Lying awake in the pre-dawn darkness, Gray acknowledged two uncomfortable truths. He was powerfully attracted to Maeve Saylor, and that attraction extended beyond the physical. Even more disturbing, he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. For perhaps the first time since inheriting his family's fortune and power, Gray Smith wanted something he couldn't simply reach out and take. Graham Smith had never been a man to leave matters to chance. His surgical career had been built on precision, his business empire on calculated risk and strategic planning. Now, as he sat in his office reviewing Westfield's security protocols, he was implementing the same methodical approach to engineering another accidental encounter with Maeve Saylor. The student access logs provided the information he needed. For 3 consecutive weeks, Maeve had accessed the medical research library between 11 o'clock p.m. and 2 o'clock a.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays, hours when most students were home sleeping and faculty had long departed. The pattern made sense given her hospital work schedule. Thursday evening found Gray in his private study at home, reviewing research papers on neurogenetic disorders with unexpected intensity. By midnight, dressed in casual attire, dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that downplayed his imposing stature, he entered the research library's west wing through his private access door. The cavernous space was dimly lit, with pools of focused light illuminating individual workstations. Most sat empty at this hour. Gray moved silently through the stacks until he spotted her, bent over multiple open textbooks at a corner desk, headphones covering her ears, completely absorbed in her studies. Watching her unobserved, Gray felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. Maeve had exchanged her typical neat appearance for comfortable efficiency, hair wrapped in a colorful scarf, oversized sweater hanging off one shoulder, revealing the elegant curve of her neck. For nearly 15 minutes, he observed from the shadows, questioning his own unusual behavior. When had Gray Smith, who commanded boards of directors and medical conferences with unflinching authority, become reduced to lurking in libraries at midnight? The absurdity snapped him back to his purpose. He selected a research volume from a nearby shelf and approached her table directly, his footsteps finally alerting her to his presence. Maeve looked up, startled, removing her headphones with a quick motion. "Dr. Smith," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I didn't expect anyone else here at this hour." "Miss Saylor," he acknowledged with a nod. "I could say the same. The library officially closes at 11. I have special permission because of my work schedule." Her tone carried a subtle defensiveness. "The administration approved it." "As did I," Grab replied, gesturing to the chair across from her. "May I?" A flicker of hesitation crossed her features before she nodded, closing one of her books to make space. "I was just reviewing the Goldman paper on beta-amyloid aggregation patterns. Fascinating work, though I disagree with some of their methodological choices." Gray placed his selected volume on the table. "Interestingly, I have some thoughts on Goldman's approach myself." He tapped the book's cover. "This more recent research by Takahashi suggests an alternative pathway worth considering." Maeve's expression transformed from guarded politeness to genuine interest. She reached for the book, her fingers brushing his momentarily as she took it. The slight contact sent an electric current up his arm. "Takahashi's work isn't on our curriculum," she said, already scanning the pages with keen attention. "Perhaps it should be," Grab replied, settling into the chair. "Your research proposal and your application about early biomarkers for neurodegeneration in underserved populations shows promise. It's similar to a project I was involved with before moving into administration." Maid glanced up, suspicious again. "You remember specific details from my application?" Gra had prepared for this. "I review promising research proposals regularly. Yours stood out." He gestured toward her notes. "I'm curious how you'd address the challenge of limited genetic diversity in current studies." The calculated question worked perfectly. Maeve's professional passion overrode her wariness, and she launched into a thoughtful analysis that revealed both her exceptional understanding of the field and her personal connection to the work. "The research focuses overwhelmingly on genetic markers common in European populations," she explained, leaning forward unconsciously. "When diagnostics and treatments are developed from that limited data set, we see predictable disparities in efficacy across different genetic backgrounds." A significant oversight, Graham agreed, matching her intensity. "Though pharmaceutical companies have little financial incentive to address it, which is exactly why academic research should lead the way," Maeve countered. "Medicine's purpose isn't profit maximization, it's healing. If we allow market forces to dictate research priorities, we're abdicating our fundamental responsibility." The challenge in her tone, delivering what amounted to a critique of his own business model directly to his face, would have irritated Gray from anyone else. From Maeve, it was exhilarating. When was the last time anyone had spoken to him with such unvarnished honesty? "A compelling argument," he conceded, studying her animated features, "though perhaps idealistic in execution." "Idealism with strategic implementation isn't naivety, Dr. Smith. It's vision." Maeve's eyes held his without wavering. "Something I thought Westfield claimed to value." Hours passed unnoticed. When Maeve glanced at her watch and gasped, Gray was startled to see it was nearly 4 o'clock in the morning. "I have an 8 a.m. class," she said hurriedly, gathering her materials. "I've kept you far too long," Gray said, standing to help collect her scattered notes. As he handed her a page of handwritten observations, their fingers connected again. This time, neither pulled away immediately, the contact lingering for 3 heartbeats. "Your insights are remarkable," he said, his voice rougher than intended, particularly for a first-year student. Something in his tone made her step back, the professional mask returning. "I should go." "Before you do." Graham reached into his pocket and withdrew a small access card. "This grants entry to the private research collections on the 6th floor. Materials that would be relevant to your interests." Maeve stared at the offered card without taking it. "Those collections are restricted to faculty and visiting researchers." "I'm making an exception." When she still hesitated, he added, "Your work merits access to proper resources, Ms. Saylor. This isn't special treatment. It's appropriate allocation based on demonstrated potential." After a moment of visible internal conflict, Maeve accepted the card, careful to avoid touching his hand. "Thank you, Dr. Smith. I'll use it responsibly." As she turned to leave, Gray called after her. "I have some research notes on neuroplasticity and degenerative conditions that might interest you. If you'd like to continue our discussion, perhaps next Tuesday, same time." Maeve paused at the doorway, turning back with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. "I'll consider it," she said finally, neither accepting nor rejecting outright. Tuesday arrived with excruciating slowness. Gray rescheduled a board dinner without explanation, something he had never done before. By 11:30, he was already positioned in the research library with relevant medical journals strategically arranged, fighting the absurd nervousness of a much younger man. At precisely midnight, Maeve appeared, her expression giving nothing away as she spotted him at the same table. She hesitated only briefly before approaching, placing her materials opposite his. I found Takahashi's theories on microvascular contributions particularly relevant, she said without preamble, producing a neatly annotated copy of the research she'd shown her, especially when considered alongside these emerging studies. She slid a folder across the table, research she'd accessed using the private collection privileges he'd granted. The gesture represented a decision, professional engagement accepted, boundaries established. An interesting synthesis, Gras replied, opening the folder. I'd been considering similar connections myself. And so began a pattern that would alter both their lives irrevocably. Twice weekly, under the pretense of academic mentorship, they met in the midnight quiet of the research library. What started as professional discourse gradually evolved into broader conversations about medical ethics, healthcare inequities, even literature and philosophy. During their third meeting, Gray impulsively suggested they relocate to his private research office for access to specialized databases. Maeve agreed with only slight hesitation, and their academic sanctuary shifted to the more intimate setting of his personal workspace, with its comfortable seating and superior coffee. By their fifth meeting, Gray found himself sharing aspects of his surgical career he discussed with no one. The cases that haunted him, the patients he couldn't save despite his celebrated skills. Maeve listened with compassion untainted by the awe or intimidation others showed him. You became an administrator to create systemic change after feeling powerless as a surgeon, she observed during one particularly open exchange. Yet you seem to miss the direct impact of treating patients. The statement, delivered without judgment, cut closer to truth than Gray cared to admit. He changed the subject, but the observation lingered. An uncomfortable mirror held to motivations he rarely examined. During their eighth meeting, Gray found himself watching Maeve's hands as she sketched a neural pathway diagram, struck by their elegant efficiency. When she reached for a reference book at the same moment he did, their fingers not only touched but inadvertently intertwined. For a suspended moment, the contact sent heat coursing through his body, and he saw her pupils dilate slightly before she carefully withdrew her hand. Neither acknowledged what was happening between them. The gravitational pull that gradually decreased the physical distance across the table with each meeting, the conversations that stretched until dawn, the personal disclosures that had nothing to do with medicine or research. Yet both recognized the dangerous territory they approached. Maeve maintained careful formality, always addressing him as Dr. Smith, despite his repeated invitation to use his first name. Gray justified their interactions as mentorship, ignoring the anticipation that built throughout the week before their meetings. The pretense grew thinner with each encounter, the unspoken tension more palpable. And with every meeting, Gray Smith, a man accustomed to pursuing what he wanted directly, found himself increasingly willing to dismantle the principles and boundaries of a lifetime for a few hours in her company.